So one time when I was serving my last church, been a few years ago now, my wife overheard me say to somebody that I was going to be gone out of town on a conference. And after they walked away, she said to me, "You're going when? I didn't know anything about that." And I looked at her with a straight face, and I said, "I wrote about it in the newsletter." Let me tell you, that's not the answer that your wife is looking for. Because the absolute second that came out of my mouth, I knew that that was a bad choice. And she proceeded to remind me that as my wife, she shouldn't have to read the newsletter to find out what my plans were. Good point. Gentlemen, my suggestion to you is learn from my tragic mistake and find an adequate enough balance between work and home that your wife doesn't have to find out things that directly affect her through the company newsletter. Not a good start. So today we continue our current sermon series, A Journey of Hope. And this series will take us all the way up to April the 8th, Easter Sunday. And throughout this series, we're going to walk along the journey of the Easter story. We're going to stop along the way, meet some unexpected people, see some unexpected events. And today we're going to stop for a moment and examine our lives as we consider the fact that we perform better when our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, and our values are in balance with each other. So I want to start with a bit from Proverbs 16. It starts with the 6th verse, and it talks about balance in a spiritual sense. Hear these words. "Love and truth bring forgiveness of sin. By respecting the Lord, you will avoid evil. When people live so that they please the Lord, even their enemies will make peace with them. It's better to be poor and right than to be wealthy and dishonest. People may make plans in their minds, but the Lord decides what they will do. The words of a king are like a message from God, so his decisions should be fair. The Lord wants honest balance in all the weights. He wants honest balances and scales. All the weights are his work." I read this week about a research psychologist at the National Institute for Mental Health. And he was concerned about the stresses of modern life on the individual and on the family. He had this notion that overcrowded conditions take a terrible toll on humanity. And so he set out to confirm his beliefs with a cage full of mice. He was going to confirm his beliefs about overcrowding in human settings by a cage full of mice. He had a 9-foot cage built, and he put 8 mice in it. 8 mice in a 9-foot square cage. Now the cage, he estimated, was designed to comfortably hold about 160 mice. Started with 8. And then he allowed that 8 to grow to a population of 2,200 mice in a cage that's designed to hold 160. Now, they weren't deprived of any of the necessities of life except privacy. They had no time and no place to be alone at all. Food was great, water was great, all in abundance. It was kept clean. No disease was present at all. So the cage, except for the overcrowding, was ideal. However, he even kept a pleasant temperature in there. I mean, everything that he could do, he did. After 2.5 years, as I said, the mouse population grew all the way up to 2,200, reached its peak at 2,200. And what he noticed was by the time it got to that peak, the colony of mice began to disintegrate. Males who had previously protected their territory completely withdrew from any sense of leadership at all. Females became aggressive and began to force their own babies out of the nests in hope of some extra space. Young mice grew to be self-indulgent. They showed no normal aggression. They failed to reproduce even. And after 5 years of this experiment, every mouse in the cage had died, despite the fact that there was plenty of food, plenty of water, and the absence of disease. It seems to me that that's a parable for how we live our lives. That's a parable of modern life. Because for many people, finding balance is at least difficult. if not nearly impossible. We allow ourselves to be so drained emotionally and spiritually. We allow it to go on for so long that we finally say enough. Why do we say enough? Because our lives were designed to be in balance. We were created to be in balance. Think about it. God worked 6 days, and on the seventh day He rested. He created day and night, and the day is for working, and the night is for resting. We weren't created to go 24/7, 365. We were created for balance in our lives. Working and relaxing, business and family, socializing, and spending time alone with God. Balance is what we were made for, and any time we let that balance get out of whack, we tend to pay the price for it. Well, in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 10, we find an interesting scene that's all about balance, about balancing self-needs and self-wants with the larger picture. Hear these words. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to Jesus and they said, "Teacher, we want to ask you to do something for us." And Jesus asked, "What do you want me to do?" And they answered, "Let one of us sit at your right hand and one of us sit at your left hand in your glory in your kingdom." And Jesus said, "You don't understand what you're asking. Can you drink the cup that I must drink? And can you be baptized with the same kind of baptism that I must go through?" And they answered, "Yes, we can." Jesus said to them, "You will drink the same cup that I drink, and you will be baptized with the same baptism that I must go through, but I cannot choose who will sit at my right and my left. Those places belong to those for whom they have been prepared." Well, when the other 10 heard this, they got angry. And Jesus called them together and said, "The other nations have rulers. You know that those rulers love to show their power over the people. And their important leaders love to use all their authority. But it should not be that way among you. Whoever wants to become great among you must serve the rest of you like a servant. Whoever wants to become the first among you must serve all of you like a slave." Okay, back in the day, they had this crazy thing that used to be on street corners, and they called it a phone booth. Anybody remember phone booths? They don't exist. You can't even find a pay phone anymore, let alone an actual phone booth. But if you ever saw one, whether you actually used it in person or maybe you saw it on exhibit at the Smithsonian, you may know that. How do you turn the light on in an old school phone booth? There we go. How do you turn the light on in an old school phone booth? You remember? Close the door. You close the door and the light comes on. You have to isolate yourself to get the light on in an old school phone booth. Just for a moment, to activate that light, you got to shut yourself off from the world to get the overhead light. And in similar fashion, when we enter a quiet place to pray and to be with God, we need to block out the noise of the outside busy world around us so that we can open our hearts to God. When we enter into communion with God, when we better sense God's presence among us, then we are more assured of God's love for us. I think one of the reasons that we should come to worship every week is to refresh and to renew our souls. I mean, vacations are great, but they're not nearly enough. We need to build into our lives a natural rhythm of work and worship. We need to shut the world out occasionally and focus our attention on God. We need to find a balance between life and spiritual life. So in this passage, the disciples, they've given up everything to follow Jesus. They gave away, sold everything they had. They left their families and their jobs and their lives, and they're following Jesus. It's understandable that at some point they want their reward. They want what's coming to them because they gave up so much to follow Him. They only wanted what they thought was due them. They didn't want more, right? I mean, we give up our passions. We deserve our rewards. And they were already Jesus' right-hand men, if you will. They just wanted to make it official. They just wanted Jesus to put the stamp of approval on one of them sitting at His left and one of them sitting at His right. But I love Jesus' response to them when they ask Him if He will do that. He tells them that they simply don't have a clue what they're talking about. He says, you can go through the motions. You can put on a good show. You will drink the cup that I drink, and you will be baptized with the same baptism that I must go through, he said. But he says, in the end, you just simply don't understand what it is that you're asking me. Why is that? It's because they haven't achieved a balance between satisfying their personal desires and serving God. Satisfying personal desires, not needs, but desires, and serving God. How do we balance those two things? Because that's the conundrum in life. How can we focus on personal fulfillment and the good of the collective whole by serving God? I want to share with you 4 steps to help better improve balance. 4 steps toward a better sense of balance in your life. The first step, maybe the most important, identify your priorities. Identify your priorities. Think about what it is that you want out of life, really want out of life, and then eliminate the things that don't help you achieve that. Think about that. What is it that I want, and what are all the things I'm doing that aren't helping me toward that goal? Well, how do you do that? Well, you start out by saying, what's most important? What's important to me? What has the greatest eternal value in my life? It seems to me the obvious choice is make God your top priority. Do what it takes to make that relationship happen. Identify your mission, and then let go of the things that aren't mission critical. Unplug yourself from the obligations that you can't give your all to, and leave yourself free for the more important ones. So the first step toward balance is identifying your priorities. What are my priorities? The second step is protect your spiritual time. Protect your spiritual time. I think most of us give generously of our time and our energy to family members, friends, co-workers, hobbies, sports, whatever it is. And we often ignore our spiritual needs. It's often not until we become physically, mentally, and spiritually exhausted that we wake up a bit and we become aware of the fact that we need to pay attention to those spiritual needs that we have. You see, at that point, we need to remember the wisdom of the flight attendant when we're about to take off sitting out on the runway. First, you got to put on your oxygen mask before you can then help other people take care of their own. So we have to clean up our own spiritual house first. Now, you probably think twice about missing work or a parent-teacher conference or a doctor's appointment or a sporting event that your kid had. Your spiritual time deserves at least that much attention. We need to carve out time that is devoted to us and our relationship with God. We need to make that a priority. Guard that personal time. And don't let work or hobbies or family or any other distractions get in the way of that. Here's a hard one for me. Stop checking your smartphone so often, or your iPad or your computer, or whatever it is. Few people are so important that they need their phone with them all the time. A couple days ago, I left my phone at home when I left the house. I was nearly in a panic when I got here and realized I didn't have my phone, and I was about to run back home, and I thought, now think that through. Is the world going to stop spinning if you don't have your phone for a few hours? And so I sucked it up, and I nailed myself here and refused to go home and get it. And it was hard, but guess what? The sun still came up the next morning after I did that. Nourishing your spiritual time leads to greater satisfaction in life. Let me say that again. Nourishing your spiritual time leads to greater satisfaction in life. Work life, personal life, doesn't matter. It leads to greater satisfaction, greater productivity, more creativity. If you don't spend time with God now, then that particular opportunity is lost forever. I'll get to it tomorrow. And suddenly, we're way past tomorrow, and we still haven't done anything about our spiritual house. So, figure out your priorities, protect your spiritual time. And the third one is develop a support system. No matter how well you plan, things are going to come up that you didn't plan for. You need help sometimes. Identify people who can pitch in during those times. family members, church members, neighbors, friends, colleagues, doesn't really matter who they are. But you want to identify people who are really good at achieving a work-life spiritual balance and learn from them. Look around you, here, at work, at home, in the neighborhood, wherever you spend time, look around you and find those people who seem to have a good balance between all the parts of their life, especially spiritual life. And learn from them. Pick their brain. Make them a mentor. And then the fourth step, the last step, is set a time frame. Set a time frame. People want overnight results. But you didn't get this way overnight. It took a while to become the person you are. If you want to change that, it's going to take a little while to do that too. So lay out a plan. Set a series of goals designed to help you reach a better balance. And then have the patience to work that plan out, knowing that you're going to make steady, maybe slow some days, but steady progress toward it. I read a great story this week about Aesop. It seems that in ancient Athens there was a man who was watching Aesop, the great storyteller, and he was playing a game with some little boys out in the street. And the man who was watching started making fun of Aesop, this grown man. He asked him why he's wasting his time on such frivolous activity. And Aesop responded by picking up a bow, as in a bow and arrow, that kind of bow. And he loosened the string and then set the bow back down on the ground. And then he looked at the man who was critical of him, and he said, "Now, tell me what the unstrung bow represents." And the man looked at it for a few minutes, and he couldn't figure it out. He just couldn't come up with anything. I don't know. Aesop said, if you keep the bow always bent, eventually it will break. But if you let it go slack sometimes, it will be more fit for use when you need it. Aesop was talking about balance in life. As followers of Jesus, it's important for us to realize that Jesus also advocates balance in life. Christianity has always been this activist sort of faith in which the emphasis is take up your cross, lay down your life, sacrifice yourself for the good of the cause. And those are important things, but Jesus never meant for us to be so involved in doing good that we neglect our need for rest, that we neglect our own spiritual needs. Our lives were created to be in balance. And one of the best ways to achieve that balance is to spend more time one-on-one with God. And so we're on this journey of hope, heading toward Easter. And the fact of the matter is that our identity and our self-esteem can make or break the journey. How we see ourselves can either make this a great journey to Easter, or it can just absolutely break us. So my question is, do you base your identity on who people say you are? Or do you base your identity on who God created you to be? Finding a firm foundation in who you are, who you're called to be, helps you overcome the obstacles in your life. I mean, there are a lot of people who base every bit of their personal worth on things that don't have 1 ounce of eternal value. Did you know that in 2009, people spent $10 billion with a B on cosmetic surgery in this country alone? Many people measure their self-worth by things like that. They measure it by their careers or their promotions or their grades or their whatever accomplishments they made. But if we continually self-assess on outward appearance and accomplishments, then we'll be continually trapped in an uphill battle. We'll be one of those 2,200 mice in that 9-foot square cage. Why? Because we simply are not always able to meet our goals. No matter what we do, we're just not always able to meet our goals. Other people will not always recognize our worth. Our appearance simply won't always meet somebody else's idea of beauty. And so we need to stop measuring ourselves through other people's eyes. We can't live up to that. To wish you were somebody else is to completely waste the person that God made you to be. We're not made in other people's image. We're made in God's image. And it's in His image that we ultimately find our worth and our balance in life. Very familiar passage in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, talks again very much about balance. It says there's a time for everything, and everything on earth has a special season. There's a time to be born, there's a time to die, there's a time to plant and a time to pull up plants, there's a time to kill and a time to heal. There's a time to destroy and a time to build. There's a time to cry and a time to laugh. There's a time to be sad and there's a time to dance. Balance. It's all about finding balance. And balance is not just some trendy 21st century New Age church buzzword. Balance is what we're created to be about. As the musicians come forward, I'm going to invite you to pray with me.